Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and I'm the Dean of Graduate Studies at Charles Darwin University. Welcome to Outrider 21, Quiet Quitting Your PhD. Let me explain how we got here. I had a student in my office who was in a rather odd situation. He'd been on a leave of absence for more months, adding up to 4 years, compared to what he'd actually been actively enrolled in his PhD. And he was in my office trying to talk through, is it time to leave the program forever, for good, or is it time for him to actually commit to the research? Now, I will help him engage with that question, and I hope I will help you think through your particular situation. Should you continue with your PhD enrolment? Or are you quiet quitting your PhD? Now, the PhD is difficult. It's difficult. Not everyone can do it. Only 1% of the world's population is able to graduate from a PhD, and attrition rates are really, really high because the PhD is tough. It's tough to persist. It's tough to be uncomfortable all the time. And it's tough to be frightened, thinking, can I actually do this? It's a difficult space. It's much easier to be enrolled in a PhD and not actually do too much about it. And I always tell the famous story, as most of you know, I'm a Western Australian, respect to all the West Australians out there. I'm a West Australian, and in my youth and my 20s, it was always fascinating because it's a place called Fremantle, or as we describe it in Western Australia, Freo. In Freo, there'd be, you'd go into a coffee shop in Freo and you'd say, hi Phil, what do you do, Phil? Oh, I'm enrolled in the PhD. Hi Sharon, what do you do? I'm enrolled in the PhD. So basically half of Fremantle's coffee shops were populated by people enrolled in a PhD. Whether they were actually doing a PhD or not is another question. And that's what's happened in the subsequent 20 years. That's why all the focus now is on training supervisors, having supervisory charters, and making sure that students have milestones and stick to those milestones. All of this exists to make sure that you don't just sort of drift into attrition, that you make decisions about your life. You see, and I'm an old lady, so I can say this now, a successful life is punctuated by powerful decisions. Failure is punctuated by blame and displacement of responsibility onto other people. Failure is also demonstrated by an inability to make difficult decisions. But quiet quitting of your PhD is a thing. And it particularly has become a visible thing since COVID-19, since the pandemic. Quiet quitting or silent quitting emerged as a phrase through 2022, of course promoted through TikTok, obviously. Quiet quitting describes the workers who do the basic requirements for a job, but with no initiative, no working overtime, no volunteering for extra tasks. So they're going through the motions to maintain their job and not too much more than that. And absenteeism is a real characteristic of this particular group. And I understand why this quiet quitting, silent quitting movement has emerged, because COVID-19 made all of us think about our relationship with paid employment, our relationship with work. So what I want you to do is think about, and this is hard, right? We're going to do some hard stuff today. What I want you to do is think about your relationship with your PhD right now. Are you actively engaged? Yeah, bring it, come on. Are you actively engaged? Are you not really engaged? Or are you actively disengaged? Okay. So it's the not engaged group that are significant, and they're detached from their PhD. And I understand how this happens. If your supervisor is exhausted, overworked, underskilled, not hugely interested, then a student can remain not engaged for months. Quiet quitting was also a way, though, to address chronic overworking that again particularly became visible through COVID-19, the 24/7 working and employees being at the end of COVID exhausted and being angry, and therefore making a decision to re-establish working boundaries at the conclusion of the pandemic. Now, in the doctoral space, this type of movement is confirmed by the students who really suddenly make a decision to reimpose boundaries, to say, you know what, I am not responsible for my supervisor's publications. I am not responsible for managing the equipment in the lab. You know what, I'm not responsible for supervising the other students in this group. Now, at a certain point, those students are saying, you know what, I'm going to focus on my PhD, not those other students. And that's not quiet quitting. That's actually excellent. That's re-establishing boundaries. Do that. Now, Grant Cardone, in his work on quiet quitting and the silent resignation after COVID-19, argued that both these movements raise questions about the role of work in the building of our identity. He also makes the point, and this is a great point, I think, that there's no great job out there for us. The grass is actually never greener. Late capitalism, it's tough. Most of the jobs are pretty rubbish, okay? You're not going to go to anything great. Most jobs are damn difficult, okay? But I thought Michael Levitt's point was a really great one, and I've carried this forward in my life. Quote, quitting is an inevitable part of life. We quit something that is no longer serving us. End of quote. Excellent. So quitting has value. Stopping has value. The challenge, I think, with quiet quitting is it displaces accountability. It displaces decision-making through moments of stress and crisis. Now, Michael Terry argues that quiet quitting is passive and it increases helplessness. Okay, so what we've learnt from this new literature post-COVID about work is that quiet quitting is a short-term measure to recognise the boundaries around work and life, to help us think about, once more, what is important. But the trouble is, it's also a denial, it's a blockage in making an important decision in our lives. So for the second half of this Outrider, I'm going to provoke you to make a decision. I want you to think about, have I been quiet quitting this PhD? And perhaps today is the moment to make a different decision. But before I move into that emotional space for decision making, to provoke you a bit, I want to start with a fact that very few people talk about, and I try and always talk about it, to be honest, and that is the intellectual ability of a student that graduates from a PhD and the student that attrits from a PhD is the same. So in other words, all sorts of people and organisations justify the reason students leave a PhD program, they attrit, is because they're not bright enough. That's rubbish. The students that graduate and the students that attrit have the same intellectual ability. They leave for a different reason. So all this stuff about, we need to tighten up the admissions procedures and so forth. So, people have lift the standard so that people can finish a PhD. All of that's actually wrong. So the completion of a PhD and or the desire to leave a PhD has nothing to do with intelligence. Okay, now there's my fact. Now let's enter this emotional space to enable your decision making. Now, in an office like mine, I see students on the best day of their life And I also see students on the worst day of their life. And I have students who ask me on a daily basis, should I quit the PhD? And there's no easy answers to this question, but what I do is I do an exercise in my office. Now, I thought in the Outrider today, we'll do it together as a family, okay? So we're going to do the exercise to enable decision making for you. So what I do is I get students to create a visualization, to summon an emotional state in response to a statement I'm about to make. So in this Outrider, let's do this together as a family. Let's close our eyes. Let's take a breath. And I want you to focus on your emotional state after the statement I am about to utter. Here we go. Right now, I am taking your PhD away from you. Right now, I'm taking your PhD away from you. Take a breath. Sit in that emotional state. Now, open your eyes. Think about what you were feeling when I expressed that statement that I was taking your PhD away from you. This is important. If you were relieved, I'm taking your PhD away from you, and you went, yeah, wow, thanks, brilliant, yeah, I'm out, thanks. You need to leave the program. So if you're relieved, save yourself, please. Please leave the program. I wish you well. You're torturing yourself. Let's end it, all right? If in response to my statement, you got really teary, it's like, oh no, I love this thing. I love this PhD. It means so much to me. If you had that emotional investment in it, then it probably is a sign that we can continue on the thesis. So if you're just bathed in relief, yeah, I'm out, bye Felicia, it's been great, do something else, enjoy your life, right? If you're upset at the idea of leaving, then okay, you should stay, but we've got some work to do, okay? So this is the point right now where we're going to stop quiet quitting your PhD. We're going to make a decision. If you feel relieved, you're out. If you feel bereft, then stay in the program, but we've got some work to do. Okay. So to help you make these decisions, I'm going to work through 7 decisions for you to make today to reconnect, to become actively engaged in your doctorate once more. So this is going to stop you quiet quitting. Here we go. 1, gain some perspective. A PhD is just a PhD. It is just a qualification. It's not cancer, it's not global warming, it's not the drought in regional Australia. As I've often said, you are not your PhD. This thing is just a degree. It's just a degree. It's not your identity. So put the qualification into perspective. If the thesis is torturing you on a daily basis, there's no highs and there's no lows, it is time to leave. 2, here we go. Do you need this qualification to enable your future career? This is an important question, and it's time to really get real here. But also, besides me always reminding people, look, this is a qualification. Start it, finish it. But I need to make sure that you know that it's absolutely crucial for jobs in university. So if you think you're going to work in a university, then you're going to need a PhD, because I don't shortlist for any job any person that doesn't have a PhD, right? So that's the deal breaker when I'm shortlisting for jobs. So getting the PhD is important if you believe you're going to develop an academic career. Remember that most PhD students today don't end up working in universities. The split at the moment, depending on the university, is about 60-40. So 40% stay in the university in some form, 60% go into diverse industries. Therefore, put the PhD into a clear frame. It's not a life's work. Treat it like a job. Don't sit in quiet quitting mode. Start it, finish it. So, yep, the PhD sometimes makes you unhappy. Very unhappy, absolutely. But you know what? Work isn't pleasant. It mostly isn't pleasant. That's why it's called work. That's why they pay us. Because we wouldn't do it if we weren't paid. So make sure you've got perspective on this degree. It's hard, it's an effort, and you're going to have to struggle every day. But remember, if you want an academic job, it is a matter of every day grunting through it and finishing it. And also understand why you're doing it. You're doing it so you get this job. So recalibrate your expectations and understand what is required. 3, are you too emotionally invested in your PhD? This is a biggie that I've seen develop through my career, to be honest, as I've aged. This is now increasingly becoming a problem. Are you too emotionally invested in the PhD? You know, getting your expectations or your feelings hurt is not a reason to quit a PhD. Your supervisor, your fellow students are rude to you, they ignore you. That's not a reason to quit your PhD. Life is dreadful most of the time. A PhD is part of life. Now, if you need this thesis for a job, then you need to treat it like a job. It's not a love affair. You have a responsibility and you need to finish it. So change something. Change your expectations. Change your mindset. Sharpen your project. Change your supervisory team if you think that'll help. Go hard. And remember, I'm not saying if someone is racially or sexually vilifying you, that's against several laws and many of the policies in the universities. Call out bullying, sexual harassment every single time. That contravenes policies. Okay. But if you just sort of, oh, look, I'm not too happy, life's terrible. A PhD is difficult. Just finish it. Don't quit. Change what you can change. And finish quickly so that you can move to the next stage of your life. Please don't romanticize the doctorate. Don't romanticize intellectual or academic life. Don't romanticize work more generally. We live in ruthless, tough, nasty, backbiting times. We live in ego-driven times. And the PhD is part of those times. So, remember when Charles Darwin talked about survival of the fittest? He was not talking about the people who could do CrossFit. He was talking about the survival of the species that could adapt. That is, they could adapt and survive and thrive. Now, if you have a narrative about how you thought your life would be, and stuff that's happening in the PhD is challenging that life narrative, then it's time to change the life narrative. The PhD does not exist to make you happy. It exists as a bridge in your life to move you to a different time and a different space. 4, do you fixate on the end point? This is an interesting one. Now, you know I always say begin with the end in mind, and that's always important. But it is important also when you're 3 months in a PhD or 6 months in a PhD or 18 months in your PhD that you don't judge yourself by the criteria of a fixed and final thesis. Okay, that's important. One of the reasons we have milestones and why we're going to be doing a lot of work on milestones in the next little bit is I want students and supervisors to assess students on the way by the expectations of where they are in the program, not via the end point. Now, Oasis named one of their great albums, Be Here Now. Love that album. And for me, that's always a bit of a mantra of life, that we occupy our present. We be here now. Judge your now. Not where you think you should be, not where you feel you should be. Be here now. 5, important one. Be aware that the midpoint is the danger point. Again, people don't tell you this. Let me tell you this. one of the reasons we run a mid-candidature review event, so the people in the middle of the thesis, and why that sort of training PD event is incredibly difficult. People are crying, people are sort of shouting, people are desolate. It's a very, very emotionally difficult professional development session to run. And the reason is the midpoint is actually the crisis point for the PhD. So if you're feeling shaky in the middle, the first thing you need to know is that's absolutely normal, right? That is, you're doing absolutely the right thing. You should feel pretty weird in the middle because you're halfway down the tunnel, you've invested a lot, and you know what? There's still a fair way to go. So obviously you're feeling a bit weird about it, right? So know that this mid-stage is an anxiety point for everybody. So what you have to do at this point is check that the fundamentals are in place. The fundamentals are right for you. So you're working towards your milestones, your achievement protocols, your backward mapping is clear. You've got a good emotional separation between yourself and your identity and the doctorate. And if that's all in place, take a breath, and keep going. Cool. 6, recognize that supervision might be only part of the problem. Students that blame their supervisor or their advisor for all their problems are very difficult to help in my office. We all know the cliche, it's your thesis. It's not supervisor's thesis, it's your thesis. And I know students get very agitated when I say that, when other people say that. But the reason we sort of do have to say it's your thesis is to stop the displacement of blame onto other human beings. Remember that your supervisor, most days, academics are pretty well killing themselves at the moment. Academics are working 60, 80, 100-hour weeks, right? This is exhausting. I record these videos now at 2:30 in the morning on Thursday mornings, right? So that's where we're at now. I remember someone said to me, "Oh, the lighting's a bit weird," and you're Outriders, and went, "Yeah, well, it would be at 2:30 in the morning." Yeah. So your supervisor may not be helping you, okay? And I'm really sorry about that. But they may not be able to help themselves at the moment. So blaming your supervisor may be a strategy that you're using to block yourself from making a clear decision. Yep, absolutely. Change your supervisor. But recognize that if you haven't sorted yourself out first, so you've done the deep work, why am I doing this PhD? Your commitment, your doggedness, your expectations. If you haven't done that work, then no supervisor can help you. So check, and this is tough work, I know. Please do check if you are using your supervisor as an excuse. You're using your supervisor as an excuse for your issues and for your inability to make a decision. Recognize that's about you. It may be not about your supervisor, and it's time to leave the program. And of course, 7, take a leave of absence first. Now, this is unusual for me. I never recommend leave of absences because, by the way, the sign of a student that's about to attrit is they take a lot of leave of absence, right? And I don't recommend it because students, when instead of making a decision, go on a leave of absence, right? So instead of actually going, am I doing the right thing? Instead of doing the deep work, they go, oh, I'll go on a leave of absence, right? But when I'm about to leave, I think this is the right decision, and you're just not quite sure, that is the time to take a leave of absence. Absolutely. If you want that final guarantee that this is the right course of action, then please do this. Now, when you're in the leave of absence, if you feel so much better being away from the PhD, then that's your decision. If on your leave of absence, you really miss the thesis and you start to feel sort of excited again about the project and about research, then you can rejoin the program with that rejuvenated energy. So that's great. Quitting the PhD is no shame. It's no embarrassment. And you know what? It's no one else's business. But what I'll ask of you through our work this week is that if you're about to quit the PhD, that you do the work and you earn that decision. Do the homework. to make sure that your feeling is not just simply it's a bad day or a bad week or a bad month, or you're at the 18-month mark and you just feel anxious, right? Know that they are trigger points. If it's more than a bad month, it's more than a bump in the road, then it's time to stop quiet quitting. Remember my old line, beginnings matter, but endings matter more. Make your ending meaningful. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.